So one of the biggest influences to Professor Jiang Xueqin's paradigm is this macro historian named Peter Turchin. From my understanding of Peter Turchin, he's a Russian-born guy, and he developed something called cliodynamics. I'm literally just reading. And basically, it's attempting to take mathematical modeling and statistical analysis into history. That's why macro history. And you can kind of see why he's inspired Jiang Xueqin, because Professor Jiang loves to talk about how if you really study history and stuff, you should be able to predict, right? His channel is literally called Predictive History. One of the things that Peter Turchin talks about, that Professor Jiang also talks about, is called elite overproduction. Both of them claim that's a big sign of how society starts falling apart / becoming unstable. So what is elite overproduction? You either train or produce or import too many people, taking or trying to take a limited sphere of roles in society. AKA, what are these elite roles, right? You could say politicians, upper social economic class, other types of roles that take either a lot of education, a lot of wealth, a lot of connections, or all three. When you have too many of these people who theoretically or by their definition of their upbringing / their educational progress should be part of the elites, but there's not enough room in the quote-unquote elite class for them, that's how you get elite overproduction. The insight that Peter Turchin talks about, and this is from an article I found online, this is what he says: elite overproduction generally leads to more intra-elite competition that gradually undermines the spirit of cooperation, which is followed by ideological polarization and fragmentation of the political class. This happens because the more contenders there are, the more of them end up on the losing side. A large class of disgruntled elite wannabes, often well-educated and highly capable, has been denied access to elite positions. One thing he said before this, it's an assumption which I do agree with. Peter Turchin mentions that people who have been trained to, let's say, take part in the elite class, whatever you call them, they tend to be more likely to be politically active. One, because of maybe they were taught, oh, you're meant to shape the world, you're meant to change the world. But two, just by being more educated and maybe more wealthy, but definitely more educated, they tend to maybe pay attention / have more understanding of the political world. By the way, in case you're wondering, it's very humid. Where I am right now, it's very, very humid. So literally, I can't do anything in this city without working up a sweat. So probably by the end of this talk, I'm going to be sweating like crazy. You guys can probably extrapolate that one way becoming an elite was possible was through education. If you guys remember back in the day, colleges really meant something, right? Going to college meant you're definitely getting some kind of good white-collar job. My dad was telling a story. So my dad went to medical school, and back in the day in China, going to medical school, especially after the things that happened in China, you were part of a class of people that was very, very in demand, right? My dad told me the story. I never knew this. Originally, after he finished his medical school, they were going to put him in residency. For those of you unfamiliar with the doctor field, residency is basically the first 2 years of your doctor training. And then after your residency, if you want to be a specialist, then you do a fellowship. But if you want to be a generalist, you don't want to do anything more than just be like that regular type of doctor, then after the 2 years of residency, usually you're a full-time doctor. So residency, they wanted to put my dad in the capital, Beijing. And you know what my dad said? My dad said, I don't want to be in Beijing. I want to be closer to home. You guys deal with it. You guys need me more than I need you. Put me where I want to be. That is the perfect story to show how much education really was valued back then, because education back then was really some kind of threshold. Not everyone could get there. That's why the STEM immigrants from many countries that immigrate to other countries, no matter where they are able to carve out a living because they truly have skill and work ethic. The reason I tell you this story is it's definitely not the case anymore. Imagine some current medical student in America. They're going to send him to New York City, and he's like, I don't want to go there. I want to be in Phoenix where my family is. Do you think he can throw a tantrum like that? He can't. I was on a rideshare yesterday, and the driver told me that in places in China, it's gotten so competitive that even doctors after work will work a rideshare to make more money and just to feel less pressure. Because, when you're driving someone, it's just a one-time client, right? You don't have to deal with them like you have to deal with office politics and maybe returning patients and stuff like that. So I heard that story. I'm like, wow, can you imagine saying this 20 years ago, before we had ride shares, before the economy and the world changed? You told someone who just became a doctor, by the way, you're going to have to drive a taxi after work. You guys know I am an Ivy Leaguer, right? So technically I'm sort of part of the elite, but I guess that's where I've always differed. And that's probably why my channel's always appealed to a very wide variety of people, because I've never ever thought of myself as an elite, and I've never ever had any sort of attitude like that. I just never felt like it's something that makes me so different that, oh, I studied a little harder, I was able to really channel some energies that I wish I didn't channel so hard into school. When I was in high school, I think part of the reason I got to Penn was that I interned at the DC Mayor's Office on Asian Affairs. So imagine you're in high school and you're able to secure an internship in city government. DC is not really a city, but you can think of it as a city, right? The District of Columbia, for those of you outside of America, very complicated structure and a lot of controversy still. There's probably going to have to be a constitutional amendment to fix it. Someone in high school like me, not just interning, but I was a star intern. When I talk about my time at OAPIA, my two friends there that I talked to every day, one was the cleaning lady who spoke zero English. I would practice my Spanish with her. I think her name was Maria. Shout out Maria. She was my friend there. Every day I spoke Spanish to her. And then, knowing how I am, I would wander the hallways. There was this other department in the DC Mayor's office. I don't remember what they did, but there was a hood dude there who was so cool. And he was like my other friend. In fact, after my internship ended, we wanted to hang out. It never happened, but we wanted to hang out. He said he wanted to take me to this like really cool hood spot where there were like really good burgers and everything. But he was my friend, man. How do you say his name? Neji. Shout out Neji. It's spelled not like that, but it's pronounced Neji. That's who I always got along with. Even at Penn sometimes, I would love to talk to the security guard. Penn's the #2 employer in Philly. Lots of West Philly hood people being employed, and I got along with them all the time. I would talk to them, the lunch ladies. I always got along with those people. Even when I was working at Fox, my first full-time job after college, the security guards at the station were all local Philly people, and I always got along with them. And so my education, my training, you could call it white collar, but I've always been much more of a blue collar type of person. Maybe I'm rare, and that's why I didn't really fit in at Penn. And there were even people there who sort of made fun of me. It's like they could tell I wasn't really cut out to really have fun at Penn. Now, those of you know, I carve my own way, right? And if you've been watching anything from Professor Jiang Xueqin, you would probably see why Penn picked me, right? This guy is a big dice roll. 2 out of 10 times, this guy would end up world changing, and then 8 out of 10 times, this guy would end up like flunking life, right? But it's a dice roll, and it's worth it in their paradigm to pick a guy like me. Even in high school, I went to a very rich high school. I never fit in. I've just never felt myself an elite. And maybe that's why I've never been bitter. If this concept of elite overproduction and the fact that it creates a lot of bitter elites, I don't think I will ever fit into that, because I just have never thought of myself as elite. You guys, please weigh in on this. Do you know of people who, let's say, came from extreme wealth, extreme connections, or went to some kind of training, whether school, vocational, that were priming them to be part of the elite class? 1, how are they now? And 2, if their lives didn't shape up to how they thought they were going to be, how did they react to that? I think these are all very interesting points to look at. Now, the final thing to keep in mind is, because I haven't read Peter Turchin, I'm sure there's parts of what he says that either Professor Jiang doesn't really talk about, or Professor Jiang's building up on it. So I can't attribute everything that Professor Jiang says to Peter Turchin. But one of the things that Professor Jiang mentions a lot is the concept of the bureaucracy and how training people to be part of the elite oftentimes means they end up in the government bureaucracy. Now, this was definitely the case back in the day in ancient Chinese societies that had a little bit of social mobility. They had these exams that regular people could take and it would give them government positions. In fact, the current college examination system in China, Gaokao, you could say is still structured a little bit like those old Confucian exams. I think in the West, it's a little bit more nuanced because you all know of that government bureaucrat who isn't really educated, who doesn't really care. It's just a paycheck for them. With that stereotype in mind, I don't think it's always that the people that work for the government bureaucracy in the West are the most highly educated or the most highly motivated or whatever. But I think it's definitely true that if you are recruiting or hiring for a government agency, national, state, or local, you definitely have certain thresholds, certain criteria, and one of them is definitely, okay, you gotta have at least some kind of higher education degree. So from that angle, I guess Professor Jiang is correct. A lot of governments in the West have just consistently expanded and bloated. I would say that's just a correlation, or that's just a symptom of other things. I would not say that elite overproduction causes government expansion or government bloat. I think something else causes both of those things. Now, we could rant on and on about my thoughts on elite overproduction. I think we should have the last part of this to talk about what is a potential solution. I think that's on your mind, everyone's mind. How can we reverse elite overproduction if possible? I think the worst way, it's effective, but it's definitely not humane, is when wars take out a lot of people, right? But we don't want that. So I think we can immediately discard that idea. A lot of people nowadays, I think, are taking an alternative to thinking that going to higher education is the only way. There's a lot more emphasis on vocational schools, or even just directly getting some kind of certification that shows that maybe you're not going to be able to quote Shakespeare, but you'll be able to do 3 or 4 tasks every day. That's what a lot of certifications are theoretically trying to show. Now, the issue is the market for getting certificates in many, many things, it's also bloated, right? So that's a secondary bloat, a secondary bubble. Professor Jiang talks a lot about the Ivy Leagues, and he talks a lot about the differences between the different types of colleges. I think there's a benefit to going to college. More people need to start taking the state schools, the liberal arts colleges, the top 50 colleges more seriously. The way to fix a lot of these issues, in my opinion, is not to tear down everything, but maybe just look at one little thing that could be the ripple. And my thought is there's got to be a cultural shift. Maybe it's happening already, but by me talking about it, I hope it gets more and more people to think about this. Don't go to a college just for its ranking that's arbitrary, that they pay for. Go to a college either because you think you can really learn a lot, or you think whatever you're going to do in this college is setting you up for a job. I think those are the two reasons to go. Everyone talks about networking, about blah, 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 blah. You could do that too. And I know Professor Jiang would push back on this because I think he's decided on what colleges really do. But me, being the idealist, still thinks colleges can become the place of getting actual life-changing education. I really believe that. I think if more and more people could actually experience that and vouch for that experience in college, then at least from a humanities, from a civics, from a general Geist level, I think colleges would become more and more worth it again. As you guys can tell, I'm trying to think about society a little differently because obviously I've not been educated in the sociology direction, but the more I think about society, the more I see what's going on. I want to see more of that, what I call holistic or big picture way of looking at society that I felt a little bit deprived of in my liberal arts education. So some of these words I'm trying to incorporate in my analysis, maybe I'm not even using them correctly, but I want to start building up a type of thinking that's a little bit emergent from just individuals or groups or institutions, etc. So I'm going to conclude it here. This is only the beginning of me putting my thoughts together. And I hope for everyone's sake that we just try to read a little more, especially the foundations of a lot of the current ideologies, a lot of the current demagogues trace their ideological influence. You can almost always trace them back to 3 or 4 philosophers. So that's, I think, a pretty fun game. Think about the people in our ruling class. Think about the elites. Study them. Try to put together who their ideological influences are and then who were the influences of their ideological influences. It's a fun little game of 6 degrees of freedom, but from a philosophical or social science way of doing it. And maybe that's what we should do in future election cycles. Every candidate, maybe we use AI. We trace the lineage of their thinking and then be like, okay, who's the ultimate person you could say was the forefather of how they think? Was it Kant? Was it Locke? Was it Mill? Was it Marx? Was it Hegel? Etc., etc. Anyways, guys, I had a lot of fun talking about this, and like I predicted, I have worked up a sweat talking about this. Hope you guys enjoyed this talk. Hope it gave you guys some things to think about. A lot more to come, and Peter Turchin mentions this in the article I read. Unlike the Foundation series, nothing's an inevitability. Let's have discourse. Let's collectively think and improve whatever we can so trends don't become an inevitability. Okay, guys, let's talk soon, man. Bye-bye.